By the early 20th century, Carl Jung had established himself as a highly respected psychiatrist and a pioneer in the emerging science of psychoanalysis. But in 1913, as Europe crept toward the outbreak of the First World War, Jung began experiencing severe apocalyptic hallucinations, including waking visions of the entire continent drowning in a sea of blood. He was a leading clinical expert on schizophrenia, and looking at his own symptoms, he feared he was spiraling into an unrecoverable psychosis. A master of the mind was losing his own. He faced a choice: medicate and suppress his impending madness, or plunge directly into it. He chose the plunge. Jung began a grueling period of self-experimentation, meticulously documenting his waking fantasies and nightmares in a massive private journal that would later become known as the Red Book. In deep meditative states, he encountered bizarre entities operating with their own distinct personalities. He held active conversations with figures like an old prophet named Elijah, a blind woman named Salome, and a winged being called Philemon. This internal landscape completely defied the rules of early psychiatry. It felt alien, chaotic, and entirely uncharted by modern science. To prove he wasn't permanently lost in a psychotic break, Jung desperately needed historical proof that other human beings had navigated this exact same psychological territory. He found his lifeline in obscure second-century texts from early spiritual sects known as Gnosticism. They taught that the physical world was deeply flawed, created not by a perfect supreme being, but by an ignorant lesser architect called the Demiurge. This put them at severe odds with proto-Orthodox Christianity. Gnostic groups violently rejected blind faith, inflexible church dogma, and the authority of organized religion. Instead, they pursued gnosis, an ancient Greek term meaning having knowledge. For a Gnostic, salvation required a direct, mystical, and intensely personal experience of the divine. Jung recognized they had documented his exact psychological landscape. Jung translated Gnostic myths into a structured psychological framework. For instance, the Gnostic Pleroma, a realm of absolute fullness and void, became his theory of the collective unconscious, a shared, inherited layer of the psyche that generates universal symbols. He examined Abraxas, a bizarre Gnostic deity depicted with a rooster's head and serpent legs. To Jung, this monster symbolized the necessary union of light and dark opposing forces within human nature. He became so deeply aligned with this framework that he wrote his own Gnostic-style manuscript, The Seven Sermons to the Dead, deliberately publishing it under the pseudonym of an ancient Alexandrian teacher. A suppressed 2,000-year-old heresy provided the precise vocabulary he needed to navigate the darkest corners of human psychology. When the worst of his psychological crisis finally passed, Jung spent the rest of his career translating these esoteric, personal myths into a clinical science acceptable to the modern world. The central concept born from this translation was individuation. Individuation integrates the fragmented parts of your personality into a unified whole called the self. This is the secular equivalent of the Gnostic quest. Enlightenment comes not from a distant God, but through inner gnosis of your own mind. Jung successfully took an ancient spiritual mystery and reverse-engineered it into a universal clinical map for human development. The original Gnostic sects were largely wiped out by the early church, remembered for centuries only as a suppressed, heretical footnote in Christian history. But through Carl Jung, their most radical idea survived into the modern era. True wholeness cannot be found in the physical world through organized institutions or by external authorities. Ultimate truth requires you to turn completely inward and bravely face the infinite and sometimes terrifying depths of yourself.